Hello and welcome to this channel. Ever since they were described by Plato, the four cardinal virtues have remained the pillars of classical ethics. When Christianity created its own culture around the core of the Apostolic Tradition, it adopted the classical heritage of late antiquity and assured the fortune of these four. I will call them here natural virtues because they are connected to the natural capacities of our soul. This means that practicing them will not save us in the Christian sense, but they will prepare us for the supernatural virtues that come to us by grace. First of all, what are the virtues? This is one of those cases when the etymology can be misleading. Originally, virtue is what makes a man or a male to be manly. The Latin term vir simply means man as male. In Greek we have the same situation. Arete, which corresponds to the Latin virtus, comes from aner, or man as male. For man as human, both Latin and Greek have distinct terms, homo and anthropos respectively. So virtus or arete in pre-classical times referred to that which makes a male to be a male. It is, in the proper sense, his skill as a warrior, but in common usage it came to mean various skills useful in peacetime also. After this shift in meaning, philosophy took it up and used it for its own ends. Within the Platonic tradition and philosophy in general, it refers to that which makes a human being to be a proper human being. Virtue is that which shapes somebody to become from a potential human to an actual human in the full sense. In fact, the classical tradition, and Platonism in particular, is nothing else than an educational program aiming to transform lawless barbarians into real humans. Somebody who will not accomplish this for whatever reason is not fully human. The term for this kind of people is barbarian, slave, or child, depending on the circumstances. The virtuous human, on the other hand, is the one who is free in the same way that an adult is free compared to a child. He or she is free to live his or her humanity to its fullest. I should mention at this point that Plato's Academy had female pupils also. So if we are to translate the term virtus or arete in English, I think the proper term would be something like humaneness for the classical meaning, instead of the pre-classical manliness. But why are they four in number, and what are they? They are four because the soul has three parts, and each part should be governed by a virtue that is proper to it. There's a fourth virtue to govern the soul as a whole. The soul itself can be divided in two parts, first and foremost, an immortal part and a mortal part. The mortal part can be divided further in two, hence the three parts. The immortal part is the rational soul that has access to the intelligible world. The two mortal parts are related to the sensible world, or the world as it unfolds to our senses. By turning towards the senses, we experience the world outside us. By turning towards the rational soul, we can grasp the invisible order behind the world that we perceive through the senses. Therefore, it is the rational soul that should govern the mortal faculties, because otherwise we get lost in the world around us. The lowest part of our soul is the seat of desires and appetites. This is the appetitive or epithymetikon part. The higher part of our soul is the seat of willpower, or irascible thymoides part. Finally, the highest or immortal part of our soul is the seat of reason, hence it's called rationer or logistikon. In a well-ordered soul, reason governs the will, and the will governs the appetites. When the willpower frees itself from reason, the human becomes somebody ready to accomplish great things, but without the necessary discipline. That is the barbarian. When the appetitive soul subdues the will to its cravings, the man becomes a crawling, shapeless blob, not deserving to be called a human. This is the portrait of a slave who knows no better. What makes us human is the will disciplined by reason. Willpower without reason is destructive. Reason without willpower is impotent. Appetites unbridled by will, informed by reason, will throw us down along the great chain of being. We could also say that the appetitive part of our soul is what we have in common with the plants. Willpower is what we have in common with animals, and reason is what makes us distinctively human. It is fashionable nowadays to say that we are nothing but mammals, or that we are nothing but civilized apes, or some such nonsense. It is perfectly true that a plant and a rock are both material things, but you can't say that a plant is just a rock. Animals have life in common with plants, but you could not say in good faith that animals are nothing but plants. We humans share in common with rocks the material nature of our body, but that does not make us a shovel of dirt. We have in common with plants the fact that we are alive, but that does not make us nothing but plants. Also, we have in common with animals the capacity to make choices, which is the essence of willpower. But that does not make us nothing but animals. We are called to make choices informed by reason, not by instinct. That is to be human, and that is unique in the world of living things. A rock is a rock by the mere fact that it exists. A plant is a plant by the mere fact that it sprouted. An animal is an animal by the mere fact that it was born, or hatched. We humans, however, are not humans by the mere fact that we were born. That is what we have in common with lesser beings than us. We remain potentially human by birth, but not human in actuality. We need a kind of second birth that is restricted to humans. We achieve that second birth, that makes us fully human, through what the Greeks call paideia, or education. Without paideia, we remained pais, or children, not fully human. This modern urge to reduce us to mere mammals or apes is born out of the war on boundaries and distinctions that modernity wages against the natural order. Yes, within our nature we find parts that are akin to the inanimate things, to plants and to animals. But what makes us really human is what distinguishes us from them and makes us unique. No wonder that virtues are so hated today. We don't live in a world that forgot what makes us human. We live in a world that hates and actively deconstructs our humanity. That is why the virtues are so important. The lowest of the virtues is temperance, or sophrosune. It is supposed to bridle our appetites. Without this restraint, our soul grows obese and shapeless. With a soul like this, we will not accomplish anything worthy in life. Unfortunately, long before our contemporary fat acceptance push for the body, there was a similar movement that advocated the virtue, so to speak, of indulgence for the soul. Just look at the culture created by Playboy and something like that. The destructiveness of this indulgence for our humanity can't be overstated. The next virtue in rank is courage, or andria. Fortitude or courage is supposed to give shape to the will and direct it one way or the other. When it is directed by the appetites, it can overcome momentary appetites for greater satisfactions later on, but when the will remains just an instrument of mere delayed gratification, it didn't reach its full potential and its proper role. A soul that can delay gratification is better than one enslaved by instant gratification, but is just a first step forward. The will reaches its full potential when it is under the dominion of reason, not under the dominion of appetites or whatever nature. Finally, we come to the immortal soul, the seat of reason. Its virtue is prudence, or phronesis. Prudence, or wisdom, Sophia, is the virtue by which we put things in their proper place, and we are capable to make correct distinctions and correct associations. This part of the soul, as I said, is the seat of reason. Now, logos, or ratio, is not what you might think it is. It's certainly not what the new or old atheists claim it is. They use the term, but they change the concept. The Greek term logos has a quite generous range of meanings. It can mean speech, or word, or even order. This last meaning may become clearer if we go to the Latin term ratio. We have in English the word reason, but also ration that come from it. So, ratio has to do with proportion and fairness. It is the faculty by which we make value judgments. Logos, in the sense of reason, grasps the order of things. Logos in the sense of speech creates the social order. This is why Greeks were talking so much in assemblies. But how come we have this faculty? How come that we recognize the order of things? That is because behind the world that unfolds to our five senses, there is a logos that orders it. With our mind, we grasp this logos in nature. With our speech, we are supposed to reproduce at the level of social order the natural logos. So it is the logos in nature, or natural logos, that makes out our world to be a cosmos instead of a chaos. We humans are rational beings in the sense that we have the faculty in our soul to grasp the reason behind the ordered world and to reproduce it in the body, social, and our own lives as individuals. This is what makes us fully and distinctively human. Now, the faculty of reasoning will be found in that part of our soul that we usually call mind. But where will we find the logos that orders the cosmos? Obviously, there is a cosmic mind with which our human mind is akin. In that mind, you will find the Platonic ideas that shape our visible world, and the proper thinking consists in conforming our subjective ideas in here, about reality, to the objective ideas up there. That is a process of natural divinization by which we become as similar to the God as it is possible to humans, as Plato put it in the Theaetetus. And this is where we get to the root problem of modern rationalistic atheism. If you deny the divine mind, then you implicitly deny the kinship between it and our mind. But if our reason is not akin to the divine reason that orders the cosmos, then how can we be sure that we grasp the truth about the world? Maybe we do, but how can we be sure that our reasoning faculty is the proper instrument for researching reality? In brief, if there's no divine to which we can unite our own finite mind, the scientific project of knowing reality disintegrates in complete skepticism and finally nihilism. So it is very important to recognize that the logos or ratio that the classical tradition speaks of is the reason that is both in our human and the divine mind. The logos of the divine mind is the ultimate ordering principle, or as Aristotle would have it, the formal principle as opposed to the material principle. Now, before we get to the last virtue, that is justice, allow me to insist a bit upon this form versus matter problem, as Aristotle calls these two. The formal principle is that which orders. The material principle is that which is ordered. Within our soul, reason is the ordering principle, and the will is that which is ordered. So in relation to reason, the will should act as an ordered matter. But in relation to the appetitive part of our soul, the will should act as a formal principle, informing the chaotic matter that are the appetites and desires. When reason is informed by the vision of ideas in the divine mind, and it informs the will, which in turn informs the appetitive soul, we have a fully actualized human being. Such a man, having his mind firmly implanted in the divine mind and his feet firmly implanted in the soil, is a true axis mundi, a traveler between worlds, and a bridge maker or pontifex. Keeping this in mind, consider now the way modernity conditions us. Instead of informing the inferior by the superior, it does the exact opposite. It tends to reduce the spiritual to the psychological to chemistry, there's a good chemistry between them, and chemistry to physics. In other words, it tends always to reduce things to their material principle. That's how you get ideas like, we're nothing but mammals. This last one is not false, as we have seen, but it sees human nature from the perspective of its material principle. No wonder we lose reason in favor of mere reasoning, and then we end up in complete feelingism. If we are to be bridge makers between the worlds, as our nature calls us to be, we face a problem. Taking each part of our soul separately, each one of the three will have divergent vocations. The appetitive part of our soul fulfills its nature when it craves and gets more and more. The irascible part of our soul fulfills its nature when it overpowers others. The rational part of our soul fulfills its nature when it detaches from the world as we perceive it through the senses and recollects itself in itself. Any one of these parts having full sway in the soul will cancel out the others and destroy the ensemble that is the human person. So each of these three can either work for its own calling or for the calling of the whole human person. The virtue that pertains to the entire soul as an ensemble of faculties and possibilities is the virtue of justice, or dikaiosune. In the seventh treatise of his commentary on Plato's Republic, Proclus takes up this question, insisting that it is one thing the perfection of the soul as a whole, and something quite different the perfection of each of the soul's divisions taken one by one. As he puts it, it is one thing to consider the perfection of each being by itself, and another thing to consider its relative perfection. None of the three parts of the soul should be left free to reach its own perfection. Instead, they all together should seek the perfection of the whole. To underline this, Proclus reminds his readers that in the Republic, Socrates calls for the philosophers who have contemplated the good in itself to be reintegrated in the body politic as philosopher kings, instead of letting them withdraw from society to enjoy their contemplation in peace. The logic is the same in both of these cases. If each part of the soul or society fulfills its own calling to the maximum of its capacity, then it comes in contradiction with the whole. So the wise choice is to develop these faculties of the soul for the benefit of the entire human person, and that will imply putting limitations on each. In the same way, letting one social class develop to the fullness of its capacity will endanger the entire body politic. The solution is to let them develop to the benefit of the whole. The essence of justice, therefore, is to give each its due and keep in place the natural hierarchy of things. The modern concept of justice as fairness in the sense of equality is nothing more than rationalized injustice on a societal scale. And, as it is to be expected, to the social leveling out there corresponds a disorganized soul in here. When we put it this way, it becomes quite apparent that the good order in the soul and the good order in the city are closely linked together. You can't have one without the other. In some very exceptional cases, you can have an individual who in the midst of social chaos managed to put his own soul in order, or a small community within the larger social body, who defied the current in offering its members a protective umbrella for personal growth, but in general it is impossible to order a society according to justice, with people who have injustice in their soul. I will not insist on this problem here, but I wanted to point it out so that the listeners will understand the dilemma of Plotinus, that I will turn to now. Dilemma that made him develop further within the Platonic tradition the doctrine of the virtues. Reading Plato, he noticed that the virtues were in the same time civic but also purifying. But to purify a soul is to detach it, so how could these two roles of the virtues be reconciled? What he did was to make a distinction between the ways the four virtues function at different levels. He developed this theory in his treatise on the virtues that you will find in the first Aeneid. His disciple, Porphyry, discussed extensively the same problem in his introduction to the teaching of his master. When we consider the way a person participates to the social order, then they will be applied as civic virtues. But when we take in consideration the soul in the process of purification, the very same four virtues will have a different meaning. In this case, temperance will consist in the immortal soul not having the same passions as the body, so it is a detachment from the influence of the body. Courage consists in not being afraid to leave the body and the things that belong to it. Prudence will consist in the rational soul acting by itself without opinions from the lower part of the soul. Justice in this case is the habit of letting reason and intellect to guide the soul without any impediment. After this we have the virtues as they appear in a purified soul. In this case, temperance is the recollection of the divine intellect in itself. Courage consists in absence of passions, after the model of the passionless divine that the intellect contemplates. Wisdom, which in this case is Sophia and not the previous prudence or phronesis, consists in the contemplation of things that are in the intellect. Finally, justice consists in fulfilling by the intellect what is proper to the intellect in itself. The highest level for the virtues is that of the paradigmatic virtues. These do not actually exist in the soul, but they are the virtues in themselves before they will appear in different forms at different levels. This unfolding of the virtues at different levels is a good description of the travel of the soul from the cave to see the sun, the source of light. If we make this connection with the famous passage from the Republic, then we understand that the soul that has left the cave, traveling along these levels, is responsible to go back in the darkness and work for the rescue of the others. But we should not get too much ahead of ourselves. It is more than enough to busy ourselves with the civic virtues.